On like a bit more of a personal question, throughout your, even if this is in the military, even if this is during your early days coaching, have you ever had to overcome any self-doubt or any sort of, not necessarily self-doubt in your coaching, but just generally, and what was your way of dealing with that, if so?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, going from being a college strength coach in the Northeast to the NSCA headquarters, was a big move for me. When I got promoted to being the head coach there, and then that role really.
So for anyone who may be listening, who doesn't know Scott, he has an incredible amount of experience and a very long career within the strength and conditioning industry. Working with high school, collegiate, and professional athletes, Scott has also been a fundamental part of the NSCA, serving as their very own strength coach, and now continues to help athletes as director of strength and conditioning at Colorado College. I hope I got that right as well. I first got to listen to Scott during his Barbell Shrug podcast, where he discusses the journey of being a strength coach, something very close to the heart. Scott and I first connected through social media in a really strange way, as someone ended up cloning his profile. But when I started out with the podcast idea, I knew I wanted to speak with Coach, not only because of his experience, but his philosophies and ideas around coaching away from the science and numbers. So Scott, thank you very much for joining me on this episode.
Got it. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
I guess we start by just taking a brief look at, your journey in coaching so far. If you could give anyone your biggest learn from each decade, your 20s, your 30s, and your 40s, what would that be?
That's a good one. I think I've done a little bit of everything, honestly, there is to do in this profession. Like I started like a lot of people do in kind of general fitness, and I realized that strength and conditioning for athletes was an actual career path or, a job. When I kind of figured that out, I really kind of became hyper focused on following that path. So, early on, I did honestly everything and anything I could do to get experience. I wasn't a great student, so I ended up joining the military after a couple of years of college, and that really helped me a lot, honestly. And when I went back to school, I was a much better student, much better focused. But I never turned down like any opportunity once I kind of knew that I was going into this like fitness, strength and conditioning profession. Like I did whatever it took to get more experience. And that was probably the biggest takeaway that stuck with me. Even now, like even when I was at NSCA headquarters, any chance to be around great coaches and just learn more from other people was a huge opportunity, I think. So, the first decade in your 20s and 30s, like I said, I did whatever it took. I worked, 7 days a week probably, and who knows how many hours a day. And when you look back on it now and you're like, wow, I don't even know how I did that to some degree. Maybe 3 different jobs, but it was what it was, and it gave me the experience that allowed me to progress into other areas of my career and to ultimately to get where I wanted to get, for lack of a better word. And then, I went on from kind of that into my first collegiate role, and that was a lot of volunteering before they actually let me, join the staff and started getting paid. So I worked for free for about a year with Dartmouth football before they ever, really put me on the payroll. But that again, if I hadn't done that, it never would have snowballed like it did. And what I mean is, after I had volunteered with football, they started paying me for football, and then they asked me if I wanted to take on men's and women's swimming. And then it just continued to snowball, and if I had never said, okay, I'll do this for free and I'll work all these hours and come in super early and help set up and fill water bottles because I'm too old for this and I've been in the military, like I never would have got those opportunities. And then, getting the opportunity to work at NSC headquarters was great. Like I said, one of the biggest parts of being part of such a big organization was like that too, was just being exposed to all the great people that are involved. And so that was just a huge opportunity to take my, knowledge to the next level, really try and learn more and learn from all these different people. And it's just been a continual process of seeking out more knowledge, I think. And now in my role at Colorado College, probably one of the best or most enticing parts of that was like I had just spent, 9 years at NSCA headquarters, and it was kind of like I felt although there was no lack of, projects or things to do there, I felt like, it was time for me to really get back into the weight room and give back, because I had learned so much and been around so many great people and such great coaches. I was like bursting with all this stuff, and I like wanted to give it back to the athletes, which at the end of the day, is, again, I'm a strength coach, and that's what I wanted to do, and be around athletes. So I think that was the biggest part. And like, it was just like, what, the NSCA is really founded on its volunteerism and the people that make it up, from state directors to committees and whatnot. And so, I felt there's no worry that they're not going to find someone that will do a great job and probably take it to the next level. And it was time for someone else to step up to that opportunity.
I guess it comes in everyone's journey. There's a point in time where even if you love what you're doing, it's just nice for almost a change of scenery and, to transition into something different. Something I'd like to cover, what was it that allowed you to sort of be super patient and have faith during those hours of, voluntary work? And were you sort of under the impression that hopefully one day this hard work will sort of pay off, or was it just something you just committed to doing and something you took on from the military with that attitude to just go all in regardless?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I knew that once I had kind of started working college athletics, like I knew that was where I wanted to be, at least at that time. And not that I didn't entertain other ideas or think about, what would it be like to be in the NBA or NFL, but I really was just like, okay, how do I do the best job that I can do here to learn as much as possible? And that was really the underlying kind of factor the whole time, is just like learn as much as you can, because, and I think it might have been, it was maybe even a Ron McKeefery book or article or something that I read at some point along, and it was just like stuff that he was talking about, of breaking into the field and how you get started, and probably a lot that I talked about in that Barbell Shrugged episode. But like, and I just took that to heart, and I was like, okay, this guy is doing what I want to be doing. Okay, so I'm going to listen to what he's saying and try and run with that advice.
I think a lot of younger coaches as well, they put a lot of pressure on like a specific role. And I guess it just, comes back to the notion of being in this industry for the right reasons and not necessarily chasing a badge. It's there for, developing and learning the entire time. And as you know more than anyone, there's always something new to understand and something new to learn. So what advice would you give to a younger coach who's, in their 20s, putting a lot of pressure on, for example, I need to be an NFL strength coach, or I need to be a Division I strength coach? What would you advise them to do?
Yeah, I think it's got to be your passion. You've got to love what you're doing every day. And I don't know that, you may be very interested, like you were saying, maybe they just want that letter or logo, right? And if you're doing it for that reason, you're doing it for the wrong reasons, and you're not gonna last. It's not gonna be fulfilling. It's probably not gonna be what you thought it was.
No, yeah.
When you're like filling up water bottles at 5:30 a.m. Everyone probably thinks it's running out of the tunnel, on Sunday with the football team.
The 1%, I guess.
Right, yeah.
Focused in on.
Yeah, and what they don't realize is like, what do you mean? Well, wait, I have to work every Sunday now for however long this, So yeah, there's just things that they don't think about. And yeah, like the good thing is for those of us that truly are passionate about it and love it, like it's just like that cliche that if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. So, and obviously you have to, as you get better and you go throughout your life, you learn, how to manage your time better and really try and be more well-rounded and fulfilled in different areas so that you don't totally just burn yourself out. But yeah, at the end of the day, I never would have told you that like Colorado College is where I'm going to end up. And like, that's the end goal. I want to be director of strength and conditioning there. This is what I'm working toward for the next decade. It really presented itself, throughout the process of just doing the right things and kind of being in the right place at the right time.
So I think from that, just being super present in every role you have, any opportunity to develop or any opportunity to gain some experience, just be overly present and, essentially see what comes of that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You have to be,
Hey.
this is the all-star. You have to be, I think, the more self-aware too, obviously there's things that you can work on and strengths and weaknesses. So always trying to improve and, like I said, being a continuous learner because the field evolves so much and it just gives you a great opportunity to, connect with people, like you're doing, having a podcast, being able to interview people and kind of reach people all over the world. Like, it's getting outside of your little bubble, which is so easy to do.
Just staying open-minded and always being there this is one of the biggest reasons for the podcast. Granted, I guess everyone and every coach maybe has an element of like imposter syndrome to start with, especially as a younger coach.
Sure.
Like why me or why anyone? And that's something I think for me personally was a challenge to sort of confront and get over. But, it's a matter of just having a go and taking action and seeing what happens.
Totally. Yeah, I think when we started the NSCA podcast, like the first, time it came out, I had read somewhere that, there was 350,000 podcasts. And I was like, Are we really wanting to join this like podcast thing? Like, what are we thinking,
Especially now, given everything that's happening and everything's moved online, it's almost, gone twofold, the online world.
Right. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this evolves the profession, like when we go back to all these face-to-face meetings, how much of those will be offered, will people want to do that more? Because, probably initially, once it's all clear to travel and get out, people are going to be really looking forward to getting out and getting around your peers. But then, at some point, do we realize, wow, this is such a great medium with these web meetings and virtual conferences, and now we don't have to spend as much money out of our budget to travel. It's going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out.
It's all, it's adaptation, I guess, to the given circumstance. So back to sort of your role now, I guess, and also a big part of every job you've had is what's the sort of culture you've sort of desired to build in the athletes you work with? Whether that's behavioral goals, what's the culture you try and create in that environment?
Yeah, we have a unique setting. So we have two different divisions. We have two teams that are Division One, ice hockey on the men's side, women's soccer on the women's side, and then we have 15 Division Three teams. So a lot of Division Three training is actually voluntary. So strength and conditioning training, that is, so we really try and build, I would say, the culture of really just like making the weight room not necessarily fun as in like a place to party and hang out, but like it's a place where you're looking forward to being. And I think that helps with, the buy-in, for lack of a better word. But when it's a non-intimidating kind of, more inviting place, we get a lot more responsiveness to it. I would say the other part of that too that I think we're pretty big on is really empowering athletes and not just making them into little robots that just follow directions to the T and, move around on the dotted line. I think it's really been important for me, and part of that, it was my master's program in sport coaching I did at the University of Denver. It's much more kind of sociology and psychology based, and we just know like the relationships we have and autonomy that you're able to give athletes, you're probably going to have better success with them. And certainly there's obviously times and places for, control and structure and all these other things, but like really giving them ownership of what they're doing, I think comes back tenfold for you.
Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the biggest things. Obviously, when you've got a big group of athletes, coachability and logistics are huge, but it's how can we make that super personal so they want to come back, basically. So how important are relationships with athletes to you? Would you consider a coach-athlete relationship and connection being as important or even potentially more important than the knowledge a coach has?
Oh yeah, definitely. That's important. I mean, obviously you've got to know what you need to know to keep people safe and have a positive training effect. And one of my old mentors used to say everything that we do is about results and relationships. And so like that's entirely where I hang my hat on. It's like, obviously, yeah, we have to know what we're doing to be able to elicit training adaptations, but the relationship piece, you could have the greatest program in the world, right? And you probably heard this before, but like you could have the greatest written program in the world, and if athletes aren't really bought into it, it doesn't matter, right? So, and you could have the most simple program that's not super sexy and there's nothing fancy, and athletes believe in it so wholeheartedly they go off the charts. You'll have 10 times more success with something like that.
And I think especially now with, infinite knowledge almost at your fingertips on your phone, like it's easy to get carried away in percentages, specifics, the real depths of science. But sometimes, I feel like when it's overly focused on that, you sort of take away that, that relationship and that bond you actually create, which almost goes, beyond for few people.
Totally. Yeah. And then again, those relationships, I have kids who I'm connected through Instagram that I coached at Dartmouth when they were freshmen. And they just graduated from medical school and are going to be doctors now, and stay in touch on Instagram, and just like we'll shoot messages back and forth, and like awesome. That relationship, it's a decade later and they're still reaching out to you. It's amazing.
I think that impact, when I had mentors myself who I would still this day say, so and so gave me, the peg up, and so and so gave me this sort of perspective and influence. And I think if you can be that character to someone rather than the drill coach, sometimes that's just it speaks volumes, and it's away from fitness in the gym. That's like life development for those guys who have been working with you as well.
Right.
Next one. I guess this is a bit, I don't want you to be too biased, but have you ever sort of had a specific population or group you've enjoyed coaching the most? So high school, collegiate, professional. I know we wouldn't necessarily have favorites, but what's been your most sort of fun and I guess fulfilling role with what population?
Yeah, I mean, I really like college kids a lot. I think that, there's so much, and us, we're not really like, we're not a Power 5 school, so, we don't have kids leaving after a year or two to go to the NBA or NFL, so like being able to have 4 years with someone and develop them and see them change and mature, I think that's a great thing. And just the amount that time you get to spend with them as college athletes is so much greater. I've had a great time working with semi-pro and the ABA, American Basketball Association, and those guys were awesome, mainly because it was like a lower level professional league, so they didn't get paid a lot. So some of them were kind of grinding, trying to make it to the next level, or they were coming off of a longer career and kind of trying to extend their career, so they didn't have to get a real job. So like that really was great, even though it was guys from 20 to like mid 30s. They were still really focused on helping, on getting better and improving. So I think as long as the athlete is engaged in wanting to improve and find things that they can do better, like that's kind of my ideal situation. So that you find those in some high school kids, you'll find that in a lot of different levels.
Do you find, obviously it's easier to work with someone who's as engaged as you are? What sort of, if you could give anyone a tip to, or I'm sure you've dealt with people who are just that bit harder to get to, not just listen, but consider everything you're saying, especially in a group setting, not one-on-one. Is there any techniques or anything that's worked really well for you in the past? Apart from making them just do shuttle runs.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think it keeps going back to like the relationship building, and I forget if it was on one of our podcasts. Yeah, I think it was with Ramsey Nijam, who was with the Sacramento Kings at the time, and he's with Kansas men's basketball now. But he basically said, don't try and fix someone's squat until you know their name, and it was like, that goes a long way. Or you get a little tidbit here and there, right, when you're warming up or doing different things where you learn about them, and then you can say, oh, yeah, hey, how did that art show that your mom had, and they're like, that hits them, and they remember, man, he knows my dog's name, or whatever it might be,
And everything you say after that point almost just hits that bit deeper, rather than, here we go, it's more advice, it's something else to listen to. It's like, oh, this guy actually has something in common with me that has nothing to do with fitness, and he's taken that on board. And that, like you said, for younger guys as well, they might not seem like it at the time, but long term they will appreciate that massively.
Yeah, they know you care about them, and then they're willing to do more, or open up more, or be more willing maybe to do something else for you.
On like a bit more of a personal question, throughout your, even if this is in the military, even if this is during your early days coaching, have you ever had to overcome any self-doubt, or any sort of, not necessarily self-doubt in your coaching, but just generally? And what was your way of dealing with that, if so?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think, going from being a college strength coach in the Northeast to the NSCA headquarters, was a big move for me. When I got promoted to being the head coach there, and then that role really took on a whole nother level, after I had been there a couple of years, and probably the last few years at NSCA, it was really a high profile position. And, sometimes you're just thinking like, how did I end up here? Like I went, I had 33 people in my high school graduation class, and I wasn't a great student, and now I'm the head strength coach of the entire NSCA, and I'm in front of all these people all the time, and them kind of like the liaison. So yeah, I think you just have to remember at the end of the day, that you belong there. I put in just as much work and did just as much schooling and education as anybody else. And then at the end of the day, like, you just end up in situations for whatever reason. But, I always tried to treat people the right way. And I certainly think, that and, being a person who's high integrity, and, people have good things to say about you, that always just reinforces that you belong where you were.
Especially, like most industries, when you get into that circle, you realize it's not the biggest circle in the world, and people talk and people know things about other people. And I guess for anyone that has a position that a lot of people look up to, you probably have a good chunk of people who aren't happy for you almost. And unfortunately, that's just the world we live in. But would you ignore that sort of, I guess, sort of attention, or would you just just pass it off the shoulder?
Yeah, I think you just have to never take anything personally. You have to just kind of focus on the positive stuff. And it's the same thing with like, when you think about speaking at conferences, and typically, there's evals and you get feedback, and
Yeah.
majority of the time, most people aren't going to fill out those forms. The people that typically fill out those forms to give feedback either really liked what you had to say or really negative and didn't
Yeah.
like, and so you might get all, a few negative ones, and you just can't dwell on it because, 99% of the time also, and I've told this to anyone I know that, presents, is more about that topic than anyone else if you're talking about it in a big setting like that, most of the time. So, you just have to be confident in your abilities and just own it. And yeah, you want to seek out the people that enjoyed it and help them get better because they're interested in it. And you can't worry about the ones that didn't get anything out of it.
And it just runs with the notion of, we're all humans. We're never going to be able to please everyone. Even if we tried to, we're never going to be able to please everyone. So it's, the people that support and believe what you're saying. It's just, allowing them to understand it even more if they're interested,
Totally.
and building relationships that way.
Totally.
Bit more of a personal question, training wise. Everyone that knows you love to train. But what's been probably the biggest thing for you over your coaching career to give you the balance between training yourself and training athletes? Because I know a lot of coaches, as workload increases and they get tied into some things, they sort of put their training on the back burner. But almost a lot of people look up to their coaches, someone who does the same as me.
Right.
What's been your secret to just ride in the line?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't, I definitely have ebbed and flowed just like anybody else. I found a picture from like 2015 and I was like, holy cow, how fat was I,
Yeah.
And so like, it's just being consistent though, and that doesn't mean necessarily that you're consistent every week of your life, but it's been being consistent over 25 years of strength training, that and feeling like you recognize different times when you may have slacked off and you need to get back at it, and that's the best thing about understanding the training process too, is like you're preaching this kind of stuff to people every day. So I can't tell them, and that was one big thing with this whole quarantine and safer at home stuff. I was telling all of our kids, hey, this is such a great opportunity. You only have to worry about training and school and spending time with your family. And I was like, well, man, I can't go back like slacking off. Like
Yeah.
I have to be as hardcore as I've ever been right now, because I'm trying to tell all these 350 athletes that they should be doing the same thing. And if they see me not doing that, they're going to be like, well, whatever. He doesn't really mean it, So I think it's consistency, and again, I joke around and hashtag, never trust the skinny chef all the time. And
Yeah.
even though I'm sure there's plenty of skinny chefs out there that do a great job at cooking, it's about credibility really more than anything. It's not about who can squat the most as a strength coach or who looks the most jacked. It's about credibility, And if I was trying to train marathon runners, I would expect to have a pretty high level of marathon knowledge, whatever that might be. So
I think that first-hand experience as well, like it gets away from the textbook and allows you to just resonate massively with how that person's feeling.
yeah,
And by no means do you have to be the best athlete in the world to be the best coach in the world. But if you can, what that feels like, you can just
yeah,
almost approach it in a completely different manner than assuming what it feels like.
totally.
So how important do you think like leading by example and behavior is long
Yeah,
term, especially?
yeah. I mean, it's so important because, a lot of people will do what you say because you say it, and maybe they take it in authority, but a lot of people, are going to watch you and see your actions and see how you carry yourself, and then they're going to follow you or listen to you because of the way that you carry yourself, and that's, kind of how your core values or your beliefs come into play, or how they show up is like how you treat other people, how you handle yourself. That's going to come back as well in your life, whether you call it karma or whatever you might want to call it. That's why it's so important, I just think, to to walk the walk, for lack of a better term. And again, if you're asking athletes to do something, you should probably know what it feels like, whether that's a 300-yard shuttle or a max effort squat, right? So that you can tell them, like, oh, hey, listen, when I did this, this is what I went through. And again, it's connecting, it's relationship building.
So on those days, you sort of, we're all human. We don't feel 100% all of the time. Is there any sort of go-to self-care methods you use just to sort of feel better, or does getting into the work environment just bring it out of you? Do you train? Do you go for hikes? What's your go-to?
Yeah, I mean, I think the outdoors is probably, especially living in Colorado, is a big one for us. And a lot of the time, if I'm not gonna train, as long as I'm getting outdoors to do something, mountain bike, hike, just walk the dogs, that's enough of like a mental shift, and makes you feel good again. I usually can get it from that, and again, I think being around the athletes, it's hard to have a bad day too, just because you have to kind of show up and set the temperature sometimes. So they need to kind of see how you're acting, and if you're not really feeling it all, maybe that's a good day to give your assistants the reins, or your interns, or your GA, or whoever, and take that session off, or just stay in the back of the room and not really do much.
I guess especially the more, the longer you work with an athlete, they can sort of sense how you feel as on just a person to person level. So, it's almost a two-way relationship in that instance, especially with a slightly older athlete. They can sort of consider things from your point of view as much as theirs.
Right.
How important is balance for you? I understand there's never enough to know, there's never enough to learn. But how do you or what would you say is important with regards to balance and scheduling time to yourself throughout the whole sort of coaching journey?
Yeah, I mean, you have to do it. I think when you're younger, like you said, when you're first getting started, you may not need that as much. Like, I just think you're able to do a lot more things a lot better. And, at some point though, priorities change, whether that be marriage or kids or relationships or whatever it be, owning dogs, right? I mean, so you have to understand that, and it takes getting older and getting wiser too, that, sometimes at the end of the day, like, no one's going to die, at least in our profession, if we don't do something, whatever that might be. If it's that training session or whatever, that program that you were supposed to write and you decide to go home instead, our job, our business is not life or death for the most part. So, and for me too, I have to a lot of times schedule stuff too, like my training. If I don't prioritize it and kind of put it on my calendar, it's too easy to get caught up in doing other things or get called into meetings or in a normal time frame. So, making sure to prioritize the things you need to prioritize, and whether that's exercise or meditating or just, kind of whatever you do that helps your mental health more, getting outside, really getting that as a priority. And maybe that means too that you have to go to bed earlier and get up earlier, So like it's give and take there as well.
It's just being able to look at your lifestyle from a greater sort of vision and go from there. Final two questions. If you could go back in time to when you started coaching, or when you got into the fitness industry anyway, I guess you touched on it at the start, but your vision's obviously changed, your expectation on what being a strength coach is. What wisdom and advice would you give to yourself if you could just jump back in time?
I think I definitely didn't have the opportunities, and maybe I just didn't know about them at the time. to do like internships and GA positions, you know. So I think I would look into that more, especially like a paid GA and where you're able to, you know, get a master's degree and maybe get some money too. I mean, I just had to do most of my experience as I worked full time because again, I maybe, you know, entered a little later, but I also just didn't know about those opportunities. So, you know, getting involved in the NSCA was something I did when I first found out about the organization. And again, even though I wasn't a student, but like there's just so many resources available through like an organization like that, especially to young people. And again, the best part about doing it is when you're able to, as a student, is you don't pay full price.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, once you're not, you're paying full price for all that stuff. So, you know, I'd say take as much advantage if you're a student as all of the student rates and discounts and involvement that are possible.
Last one. Where can people find you? Obviously, the Strongman YouTube has returned.
Yeah, yeah.
Where can people connect and
It's come
find you?
back. Yeah. Instagram is probably the most easiest way to find me at Coach Caulfield. I do have Twitter at Scott Caulfield, but I do most of my just reading and information gathering on Twitter. Spend most of the time trying to give people some inspiration, a glimpse at what a day in the life at Colorado College is like on the gram. So yeah, that's probably the best place. But I'm getting my link tree set up, so I'm trying to get my YouTube page going.
Yeah.
Going to start doing some more stuff there. So hopefully, I've got a website which is really right now kind of just going to house some general information. I haven't really totally figured out what the website's going to do or serve its purpose as, but that'll be kind of a platform, and that's coachcaulfield.com. And once I get more stuff, we'll be, you know, throwing it up there first too.
Cooking. Well, Coach, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for sharing all those sort of ideas and wisdoms with us. It's much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.